Hello, 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 hello. My name is Rory. If you've never been here before, you are on the Varietal Literature YouTube channel, which is a group of writers from Vancouver who just enjoy playing around with narrative, and we do that in several different ways. But the way we're going to do it today is I'm going to read one of my own original works. If you want to read this whole story yourself, though I will eventually read all 4 parts live, I'm going to spread it out a bit. If you do want to read it yourself, though, the link in the description will take you right to it. All 4 parts are up on our website, varietal-literature.ca, or you can click the link down below. Why is this a little different tonight? Well, if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know that normally we do a live show called The Varietal Show at 6:30 on Thursday nights, which it is now. For you, anyways. It's not for me, because I'm not live. The reason for that is Delaney Yvonne, who is the wonderful graphic designer who created our logo here at the Varietal, the V with the book edge, has a art exhibit going on tonight, and the showing is sort of right in the middle of the show, and of course I want to go and support our local artists, so that's why I'm not here with you. Not that I don't appreciate everybody who shows up here 6:30 every Thursday, where we screw around with narrative and write stories together. We also, if you've never been here, on Tuesdays we read sort of fairy tales and old mythology together, and we do kind of random stuff here and there all the time. If you just want to read stuff, though, go to varietal-literature.ca. We have a whole bunch of writing from a whole bunch of writers, including Choose Your Own Adventures that you can click through that are, I think it's all fun. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't. So, tonight, though, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a thing called live reads, even though it's, it's live in a sense. Like, I'm doing this in one take, so you'll get the experience of me reading my story alive, but obviously I won't have the interaction in the chat. But because it is a 4-part story, if you have questions about the story, pardon me, leave it in the comments below. And when I get around to reading part 2, I will take some time to answer any questions I get there. And so on and so forth until on the 4th part, I suppose we can try and really aim to do that live so that everybody has a chance to discuss with me as well. If you want. If you just want a story, though, that's all we're going to do. So this is called The Deadwood Reaches, and you can see we have our little icon page. So if you're trying to find it on our webpage, that's the first one. As far as why it's called The Deadwood Reaches, you'll find out pretty quick. I wrote this, it's basically a small novella. I wrote this over the summer of, when I was at the writer's studio, actually. Spring and summer of being at the writer's studio. And I wrote it because I thought to myself, what if people had seasonal cycles like trees? Even though that doesn't really matter that much in the story, that was the inspiring thought if you're looking for where do you get your inspiration, which is a question that comes up. So I'm just going to read the story. It's going to be a little shorter than we normally do on a Thursday night. And then I'm going to sign off, and I'll be back live next week, so don't worry about that. And again, if you want to read the other parts, if it leaves you itching to find out the rest of the story, check the description. There's a link, and you can just keep link hopping at the end of each story. Will take you to part 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so this is The Deadwood Reaches. Part 1. Oh, my water's a little out of reach. One second. There we go. Get that realistic feel. The Deadwood Reaches, Part 1. The first I heard of them. There is a valley where people grow like trees, walk around like men, then lose their features and dry to deadwood in the winter. It's just a tale to most towns, but most towns are more than a day out by car. The towns closer to the valley take it seriously. The closest is called Ridge City, though it is in no sense a city. It's just a few strip malls set out on a cliff over fields of blueberry that drool down the hill to the freeway. The first time I went up to Ridge City was to hunt boar. I brought my older brother on that trip. My brother is a hefty, bald guy who can barely shoot a gun and only came because he wanted a change of pace. I went to unwind after a girl quit me. Anyways, that's why we went hunting in the middle of January rather than a more comfortable season. We were unloading the packs for the hike into the forest when my brother started talking about his wife and my lack of one. Must have gotten too serious for our guide because he cut in and said something like, "Marriage is grand, so what's a divorce?" He paused and grinned at us before finally adding 10 grand. We laughed. We asked him how he fared with the ladies. He got quiet for a bit, then changed the subject and started rambling about tree people. That's how I first heard about them. He said, "Tree people, I know it sounds nuts, but they just look like people. Once their spring blossoms fall away anyways, they get these pink flowers, kind of like cherry blossoms. They awaken with spring in them. They grow right out of the arms and legs." My brother stopped for a bit and examined the guide's face. "Is this a joke? Or are you seriously saying that over the hill there are naked tree men?" "And ladies. Never seen a dick till you seen a blossom dick," the guide quipped with a shrug. I laughed pretty hard at that. He dropped the topic as quickly as it came up, though, and became sullen, as if he had made some mistake he wanted to ignore. I heaved my pack off his truck bed. An hour later, while we were in the underbrush tracking some boar, I brought it up again. "So, these tree people, do they just hang out in the valley and die?" My guide kept his focus on tracks in the mud. It was obvious he had said more than he wanted to, but I was curious. So I asked again. He sighed, then responded, "It's a bit like that, I guess. They die. Hell, what doesn't? But nah, not exactly. Story goes they drop their blossoms in late spring, wander into town. Some people help with the harvest. They like the sun. It's a big meal for them. Fuckers never get a sunburn either." I talked about them more, but it was clear the guide wanted to drop it. Hell, I wanted to drop it. But it was hard to think of much else. I've had years now to ponder why the story hooked me, and I think it was the blatancy. Myths about Sasquatches or lagoon monsters always have their beasts tucked in some far glen or under a half-mile of water in a lake. There's always some distance or cover to make their secrecy feasible. But this story was a plain-spoken tale about neighbors of an improbable sort. I think that's what stood out for me, though I doubt I had my thoughts clear at the time. Nevertheless, the thought was a haunting one, so I remember pushing the conversation on. "Nobody's ever reported this to the other towns?" I asked somewhere farther up the trail. "Nah, we talk about it. Well, some don't, but that's just because they're afraid it'll bring tourists. A different sort than we normally get anyways. Not hunters, I mean. But nah, lots have tales around. Have told tales around. I'm not afraid tourists are going to turn up if I tell anyone." A shot went off in my brother's direction, and he dropped his gun, gripped at his arm, and cursed after a fleeing rabbit. The guide shook his head and told my brother to ease off the wide shots at rabbits. "You're going to scare the boar off. Besides, you hit some tiny rabbit with that gun, and you'll have a smear to scrape off the leaves." He laughed, then wrinkled his brow and asked, "Why are you gripping your arm like that?" "I think I hurt my shoulder," my brother said, pulling up his limp arm. The guide shook his head. "Ah, shit. You fucking popped your shoulder, didn't you? Jesus, have either of you even been shooting before? Damn city kids. Oh, well, I can pop it back in. We'll have to make camp, though. The sun's too low to go back now." The guide insisted putting a shoulder back was a common skill for guides, but my brother was still trying to get cell phone reception so he could Google treatments. This resulted in a low-speed chase, the guide pursuing the one-armed man holding his glowing cell phone toward the sky. Eventually, my brother was talked into lying down, even though he insisted his phone had bars for a moment. I stood by and laughed like a good brother. The guide bent the injured arm until it popped. After a quick yelp, my brother said it felt better. The guide then made a sling out of some rags from his pack and tied up his arm. My brother wanted to go to the hospital without delay, but that would have meant hiking through vines until the moon was the only light. So we set camp despite his protesting. I think we were gathering firewood while the sun bled orange down the sky when I brought them up again. I feel like if there were a bunch of blossoming tree people, it would bring in crowds of tourists, but you said earlier you aren't worried about that. Why not? Don't mind tourists? He paused and grinned for the first time in a while. Because no straight-laced mainland motherfucker gonna believe in a crazy tale of Blossom Dicks enough to book a trip to a mile past nowhere. So it is just a crazy trail, then, I asked. It's at least that, yeah, he said with a brief nod. I couldn't shake the feeling he was just backpedaling, so I called his bluff. At least, are you saying it's true? Well then, let's go look. Show me the valley. Let me see if there are tree people. He paused for a long moment, then sighed. It's January. It's just a grove of lonely dead trees. He continued picking at the underbrush for twigs. Show me the dead people-shaped trees then, I insisted. Not sure if your brother's up for the hike, he said quietly. Hey, I yelled to my brother. The guide is going to take us over to the Tree People Grove. Want to come? Hell yeah! I don't want to miss that, my brother hollered back, and I shrugged at the guide. He nodded his head in defeat. Is this a hunting trip or what? Because we sure aren't doing much hunting. He dropped his twigs to the ground and waved us toward the ridge. I think the hunting trip sank when my idiot brother popped his shoulder, I responded. My brother gave me a long stare as he walked up. I continued, What? I told you, pull the stock into your shoulder, you're going to break yourself. Ignoring me, my brother followed the guide up toward the ridge. We zigzagged up broken boulders stitched together by shrubs and pines. It was a steep hike. My brother slowed when the rock was to the right. His sling was on that side, so he couldn't grip the rock, and that made his steps careful. It took less than an hour, but proved long enough to leave us in the moonlight. We came out through a pass in the ridge into a wide valley crowned by high rock walls. Like the guide said, it was a grove of dead trees, and there weren't exactly a crowd of human sculptures either. Still, they were unusual forms and colors. It was easy to see them as crooked human figures. I could give him that. Most of the trees were bared of their bark, revealing the red wood beneath. They had stout trunks with plentiful thin branches sprouting from the top. Out the sides were two knobbly branches reaching skyward. Nearly every trunk split midway, producing two stalks that rooted separately into the soil. They sure look like people reaching for the moon or something, my brother said. The guide stayed quiet. He took a seat on a rock to smoke, looking to the sky or the ground, anything but the grove itself. The trees sounded as hollow as jars when I knocked at them. Well, it's an interesting grove, I'll give you that. Never seen a place like it. Still, they look like trees to me. All right, wanna head back then? Asked the guide between drags. I nodded. I didn't bring it up again. The guide was a nice guy, and I thought maybe I'd embarrassed him. We ended up tagging a boar on our hike out. I left it with the guide and drove the half day to the hospital. There was an airport nearby, so my brother arranged to fly out. I left him there and drove back to get the boar. The guide's home was a trailer and a wide ring of fences. The property also had a greenhouse with some cultured bushes and bonsai trees and a butcher shack propping up his business sign. There wasn't much more than that. He was hosing the blood off a red and blue butcher's apron when I pulled up. The meat's good, really good, he said. I knew the meat would be good, though. The game wardens put no limits on feral boar because they ravage the crops. Boars are pests that came from with the colonies, something that was brought but unwanted. The meat was good because the boar ate any damn thing their jaws could shred. The local supply of blueberry bushes and smoked game meat made their diet rich, which made the meat rich. Hunting boar makes me happy, the warden's happy, and the locals happy. It was a good quarry all around. Thank you for your hand with the boar. I have an extra day's pay and the rest here to compensate for the trouble. Do I owe you anything more? I handed him the envelope of cash. Nope, that's more than fine. Hope your brother comes out okay, he said, picking up a box of packed boar meat and passing it to me. I was still feeling guilty. Hey, sorry for harping on the tree people thing. That's all right. No dumb fault for bringing it up, he said, turning away. I have one last thing, and you don't have to answer. But you said the trees come into town and help with crops. Is this place just so remote no one driving on the highway would notice?
There isn't anything to notice. They are how you saw them in the winter, and they blossom in the spring. But they just look like you or me during the summer. Hell, they don't even know they're different, really.
They don't know they're trees? I asked, bewildered.
Most of them don't seem to, no. It ain't always that clear, though. You'd know it if you hit them, though. Fuckers are built like oaks. Look tender as a calf, hit hard as a bat.
He looked over his property for a moment, moving his gaze from his truck to the greenhouse, then back to me.
You know, I take it back. Maybe don't go go blabbing about all this. If nothing else, no city hunter is going to let me take them in the woods if they think I'm nuts, he said. I nodded and said goodbye. And that's part 1 of the Deadwood Reaches. As you can see, I'm reading this from the link on our website, which is also down in the description below. If you enjoyed this story, my reading of it, or the writing of it, or whatever else, I've added a feature on our website, which is the option to buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is a service that basically just facilitates small little donations to artists for the most part. So if, it's between $1 and $5. Our recommended is $3 for a story. But really, you don't have to do any of that. I just appreciate the opportunity to tell my stories to anybody, and that's why I set all this up. But it does help offset some, web costs. There's hosting costs associated and some other stuff. So if you have the ability and you want to give some support, go there and click that little green button you see there, buy Rory a coffee, and I'd really appreciate it. And if you don't, I still really appreciate you sticking around and listening. Again, this was the Deadwood Reaches part 1 of 4. The other parts will go up. I don't really have a schedule for it, though. I might do it over Christmas, because I'm going to be taking some time off around Christmas for obvious reasons. But do stick around the channel. There will still be videos. Not all of them will be live when I'm going away and whatever. I might pre-record some things, but we'll still be around and we'll still be delivering you narrative and so on. Again, if you have questions about the story, things you want to ask me, the author, because it is a story I wrote, put them in the comments. Comment on this video and let me know. Or you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and when you see an announcement go up for the other parts or whatever, you can add your questions there as well, and I will take some time in the end to answer them. I didn't really have time to arrange it this week, so sorry about that if you had questions about the first part that you wanted me to answer right now, but you could still ask them down in the comments or on our Twitter or Instagram at varietal_lit. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It is a huge support for us. And if you like this story and you think other people would like it, please pass it around. That's easily, even more than giving money, that is easily the thing that helps us the most, is to have word of mouth shared around. Hey, I like this story. I thought you'd like it. And stay tuned and subscribe if you want to know when we put part 2 up. I've been Rory. This is Varietal Literature. I hope you guys have a very good night. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and take care of yourself.